Hello, everybody, and welcome to Litter Media Live Special Edition. I'm your host, Mike Smith, and we're joined by longtime Chillicothe businessman Joel Gerber. And Joel's going to be talking to us in our program today about a recent humanitarian visit to war-torn Ukraine. Our special edition today is brought to you by Hometown Motors Incorporated. Back with Joel Gerber right after this.
Husqvarna, zero turns, lawn tractors, walk-behinds, handhelds, and auto mowers. All at Hometown Motors Incorporated. Buy it here, get it serviced here. Hometown Motors Incorporated, 818 Eastern Avenue, Chillicothe.
We're back with Joel Gerber. Joel, the word is getting out about your trip to the Ukraine, which is obviously been attacked by Russia many months back, and your trip was, as we refer to, faith-based but humanitarian, because what is known as Femium Church is working to basically take care of the in-country people who are suffering under this terrible attack against them.
It sure is. Femium Church has stepped up, as have many churches in Ukraine. They have opened their doors and they serve people in a way where it's not just meeting the physical needs, but also the emotional and the spiritual needs. There's just such a desperate need for people in Ukraine right now in every way, shape, or form.
For most of us, thank the good Lord, we have not ever experienced anything where we have, while we've been attacked in our homeland, unless you lived in New York City or were in the Pentagon during 9/11, we don't know what it's like to have war come literally to your backyard. But that's what these people are experiencing.
They are, and with that, it's not just the devastation physically to the property, but it's the impact on lives and the disruption of services, jobs, schooling and education. It impacts the entire culture that they're living in right now. And they're a resilient people. They've gone through much in the decades past, but they are also standing strong in their efforts to try and stand against the invasion of Russia, but also come out stronger at the end.
We're going to be showing a lot of pictures of your trip over there and what you saw, and hopefully this will impact our viewers in a way that it did you. But before we get to that, a lot of people might want to know, how does a guy from Chillicothe go to the Ukraine to even be involved in this? There were some connections, I guess. The Lord was laying out a path well ahead of this.
He certainly was. I'll give a brief background as to why maybe my heart was there to begin with. But in 2001 through 2005, 4 different times, my wife and I went to Ukraine and served as church planting missionaries 10 days each year with an organization called Global Mission Fellowship. And we became just endeared to the people and stayed in connection with many of them over the years. Well, of course, when Russia invaded and started bombing different places in the country, it just so burdened us. So we began praying for the country and donated funds to different organizations that were helping with humanitarian needs. But during that process, I just felt as though while I prayed, I was hearing from the Lord, I want more. And I didn't know what more prayer, more money, or I finally came to realize after praying a lot that he wanted me. He wanted my active involvement. So I started making some inquiries about, well, if, Lord, you're calling me to go, how do I get there, and how can I be effective while I'm there? Well, contacted organizations like Samaritan's Purse, who immediately had started sending in emergency hospitals for medical care, and they would also provide relief in the form of food and clothing. So I contacted them, and the only ones they were taking were medically professional trained or staff, because they didn't want people going into a war zone unless it was absolutely necessary. And then I contacted several missions organizations that I was aware of or had worked with before, and they said, well, no, we're pulling people from Ukraine. We're not sending anybody in. I even contacted the Ukrainian Foreign Legion, not that I was combat material, and that certainly would have been my reason for being there, but I thought maybe providing transportation for people from those war-torn areas to a safer place. But they were only taking people up to age 59, so they sent a thank you, but no thanks. After going through that, I thought, you know what, I'm going to contact somebody that may have a resource. And it goes back to the point when we were there 20 years ago. One of the interpreters asked my wife and I if she could possibly come to the United States and finish her education. So Ina Melnichuk, now it's Ina Melnichuk Ogle, came to the United States, lived with us, then finished her degree, got married, 3 kids, teaches in Chillicothe City Schools, and ultimately is just almost like another daughter to us. So I contacted her, and she said, yes, I've heard of several churches and organizations that have refugee shelters and maybe can have help. So she gave me contacts. I did Zoom interviews with the senior pastors of these organizations, and they said, please come, and come as soon as you can. We'll pick you up in Warsaw and get you across the Ukrainian border.
We mentioned at the outset, Fimian Church, that is spelled F-I-M-I-A-M. What is this? Is it a denomination? Is it an organization?
It's actually an individual church, just much like yours would be, but they are part of the Ukrainian Baptist Church Convention. So, and there are many Ukrainian Baptist church in Ukraine as well as here in the United States. So they are serving as one of the refugee centers in the Lutz area. The other one I served at was called the Retreat Center. It actually isn't a church, but affiliated with the Ukrainian Baptist Church, and they provide a retreat area for churches to come to, for team building, for just getting away, for growth in their church. And they're perfectly set up to house people, but dormitory style, large cooking facilities, outdoor areas. Fimian Church has a big challenge based on where it is and the type structure it is. It's a big church that's just not set up to house hundreds of refugees for cooking and laundry, feeding, sleeping, clothing, bathing. All those things are challenges. So just think about if in the United States our East Coast were bombed right now, and all of a sudden there were masses of people, hundreds of thousands coming, and many of them landing in Chillicothe. How would we as a community, how would we as a faith-based group of believers, as Christians, how would we respond to that? And that's a lot of what I've been talking about and questioning people about, that we might be prepared in our time of need, whether it's here or people around the world.
While you're talking, there's a scroll going across the top of the screen giving you information on where you can make donations and how you can help. But also, if you're watching this on your computer or your TV, the QR code there, if you walk up with your smartphone, just scan that, and that'll take you right to their website as well.
Thank you, Dan, for mentioning that. Certainly, someone can contact me as well if they want more information, either about the church itself and what they're providing. What I'm helping them with right now is because they're preparing to go from more than 100 that they're caring for now to 200 because of the increase, the mass influx. And so and the bombing that's taken place in the area, it's knocked out substations. So they need dependable electricity. So they're purchasing generators, drilling wells with filtering equipment, and also cooking facilities where they can cook for that many people and allow them to eat, not just have to take it outside and try and eat.
There are things that we want to be able to talk about what any of you or us can do to help, but we want to show you some pictures that Joel provided to us that might tell a little bit of the story. And this is kind of like on a scroll here, Joel, but maybe you can comment on some of these.
I will. most of the time I was there, about 5 of the 6 weeks, I spent time with refugees, actually serving and counseling and caring for them. But one of the weeks I was in the city of Irpin, which is near Kyiv, the capital city, and it was invaded by Russia the first few days of the war and used as a staging area to bomb Kyiv and try and take over the capital. Praise God, they were not successful. They were pushed back, but the damage done, as you can see in this first photo, to a bridge, it was destroyed by the Russians as they were retreating to prevent the Ukrainian army from coming. But there you can see Samaritan's Purse provided some food to this area. This is a church where, this is actually Fimian Church, the sandbags that are protecting the area. All around that city, these are homes and businesses. This was a schoolyard where you can see a bomb had hit and shrapnel just flies everywhere, as you see on this wall, an indiscriminate damage that's done. This I call the car graveyard. And there were people in these cars, and that's what the lives that were impacted. This was a small business, and part of what we did that week was actually physically work to repair a roof and get a temporary tarp up. People had been living in this since February when the bombing took place. By the way, I don't think OSHA is active there in Ukraine. These guys that were young Ukrainians helping me, they were not tied off or didn't even care they were up on the roof. So there was just so much damage done, but in fact, the damage done to the buildings was, in my opinion, minimal compared to the horrific price paid by the people. Because in Irpin, and I did interviews and did some counseling there as well, there were mass murders, there was rape and torture taking place, there were bodies left out in the street for weeks at a time when people were afraid to go out and try and retrieve them to be shot themselves. So you can imagine the mental anguish and pain that takes place in those persons. And, you know, I think part of what we wanted to provide was something of hope, something of value. Their minds can be healed only in a way that God can do. We can provide maybe a way for them to make that connection so that they might be healed in that process.
I remember Billy Graham talking about when we were just about ready to go into Iraq the first time. And he had gone to the White House to pray for the president and the nation, and he talked about the evil that is war. Yes, as we are doing this interview on December the 7th, we know that sometimes mankind has to defend the defenseless.
Correct.
What we're talking about today is not a bullets and bombs effort. This is a spiritual warfare that the Fimian Church is fighting.
Exactly. You know, that their role is, at this point, is to receive the refugees coming in, provide clothing, shelter, heat, food, but just as importantly, maybe more so, is to help them emotionally deal with what they're going through and also give them the help that our Lord Jesus can do. You know, one of the amazing things to me was almost everyone I spoke to that I was able to counsel or meet with that were refugees, their question to me would be, you're an American, why did you come here when everybody else is trying to leave? And it gave me a wonderful opportunity to share the hope that I have through my Lord Jesus, and how they can too, regardless of the desperate situation they find themselves in. There is an eternal hope that's of greater value. So
some other pictures that we have of maybe individuals that you came in contact with. We'll try to get to some of these.
Yeah, this I call the love in action picture, the one of haircuts. People from the Fimian Church would give haircuts to the refugees. These are two brothers, twins that were, I may share a little story about them later. This is the eating facility of 115 people, so they have to go in multiple shifts all day long for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This was in Irpine, where a woman who lost her daughter, her son-in-law, a sister, and a niece to the bombing. So it was a good opportunity to pray and offer her hope. These are, when you receive refugees, you receive all sizes and shapes. There's families that come. It's not just individuals. People with disabilities that we had a special event for them to be cared for. Just some friends that gathered together to have a special time for them to kind of take their mind off the war a little bit. This is a mother, her daughter went to Kyiv to serve as a doctor, and she's caring for her granddaughter. This is the staff at Church Fimian, and I joke they're a very young staff, and it's a very large church, but I think God knew that they needed people young and with energy to stand up to all this. The refugees love to be able to try and help and do things there. These I call my babushkas, my Ukrainian grandmothers. I was told I was the only male they ever allowed sit on that bench with them, so I felt kind of honored. This is the retreat center, not Fimian Church, the other one I served at, and it had some outside areas, and they do have a large generator now that can supply the electricity. That's why I'm focusing my efforts on Fimian Church. I would eat at a different table every single meal and every single day, so that I could work and listen to the stories and get to know some of the refugees. This is a shopping day where clothing that was brought in would be picked out of by people, that be supplied by people around the world. These are a couple refugees who are ministering to refugees. They are pastors from another city whose church was bombed. I'm leading a Bible study there and would give daily messages in the evening. That's my interpreter, Mark Marunyuk, who lived here in the States a couple years and I think has better English than I do. Here's a message at Fimian Church that I was giving to the refugees. We would do multiple during the week. The home groups church from Fimian Church would invite refugees to be part of their home groups as well. And just to be able to fellowship and have some normalcy of life during this time was a wonderful thing to be able to provide for them. I thought about having my hair cut, but they all had that high and tight look, and I didn't think I'd do too well with that.
Now, we wanted to circle back to these twin brothers, story.
Yeah, Igor and Kriel, they came from Kharkiv. They're 19-year-old twins, first-year college students, and they woke up one night and their mother ran into their room. Sirens had gone off. There had been bombing in the area. And she took them to the basement along with the rest of the family. They gathered some things together, and as soon as the bombing stopped, the family got in the car, took those two boys to the train station at Kharkiv, and just told them, go west. They had the clothes on their back, a few toiletries, and a laptop, and each had a phone. They ended up here 4 days later at the retreat center, and the one shared with me that he still has nightmares about being shot by Russian soldiers. So it allowed me opportunity to spend a lot of time with them and help walk them through issues that are probably very deep-seated, but they needed help right then. And they seemed to be doing a little bit better after I left, and not to my credit, but to the Lord's credit.
With the things that you've seen, the help, obviously, that you want to try to generate from others to give to this humanitarian effort. Again, remember, this is about helping refugees in that country of the Ukraine that are suffering, not only with the good news of Jesus Christ, but the necessities of everyday life. How can John Q. Citizen get involved in that?
Well, certainly, I ask first that people pray. Pray for the people of Ukraine, for provision. Certainly pray for peace. pray for restoration for them, for reunification back with families. There is such a great need in that area that the Lord can work through. But there's also financial needs, and through Church Fimian, there are other organizations like Samaritan's Purse, certainly, if you can allocate it to the Ukraine. But I know the desperate need of Fimian Church right now to make sure that they have safe drinking water that's reliable to be there all the time when you have 200 people housed in your church, for electricity to be able to be dependable, for heat, for cooking facilities, and they're setting that up outside that can work off of wood, not just gas that they typically cook from. So by using the QR code or contacting me, I thought I might give, if it's okay, my
Yes,
email address.
absolutely.
It's ejoelgerber@gmail.com, ejoelgerber@gmail.com, or certainly text me, 740-77, excuse me, that's the old days of landline, 740-701-2705. And I'd be glad to spend time sharing what's taking place and how they might have opportunity to give.
Talking about, heat to stay warm, what is their climate right now at this time of year compared to what we have here in the States?
Generally, I would compare them to a city similar to Cleveland, maybe northern Ohio, so a little colder than ours typically, a little bit more snow than we have. I've been there in the winter months in the early 2000s. I was there in the summer, and it was as hot as it is here. But it is cold, and they're living now without electricity part of the day because it's rationed typically, and sometimes without the heat if they don't have wood stoves or things like that. So it's a difficult time for them. Fortunately, they have plans now in place with the generator once it's purchased and hooked up that will be able to make that permanent for them.
I know when people give, they want to make sure that it gets to the right people. How are these materials that are being purchased getting to the people that need them?
Okay. Well, to Church Fimian, they are from inside Ukraine. They are ordering. The generators are coming from Great Britain. I know that much. I'm not sure where I think the company doing the drilling is Ukrainian, and the filtering supplies are supplied by the company that's doing the drilling. And they have local contractors that are building it's actually a temporary, like a tent structure for the cooking facilities outside and the feeding. So there'll be some warmth in there, but they mainly just needed a lot of space. They also have needs for storage area. Again, when you have 200 people housed, and this isn't a building set up for, think of your own church, usually a large sanctuary, some Sunday school classrooms, and that's very similar to this church. So they're making do best they can.
Do they have access to food?
They do. Through humanitarian organizations such as Samaritan's Purse, the World Food Bank, they do have supplies coming in. So food and actually clothing, the world has been very generous in making provision for that. They are asking for candles now, but I think they're starting to find some sources for those to come in mass quantities.
I know a lot of what we see and hear on the news as far as aid oftentimes gets referred to the military hardware. But again, we want to keep re-emphasizing what we're talking about are the necessities of everyday life that you're talking about.
And for civilians, for citizens just like you and I that would maybe have lost a home through bombing, where do we go? Not everybody has an opportunity. If you moved out of your close community, where do you have that you could go? Some have relatives in other parts of the country, but hundreds of thousands don't, and millions actually have fled the country. There's martial law that prevents any male 18 to 60 from leaving the country unless a unique circumstance like a disability. So all the males have to stay between 18 and 60, but the rest of the families, many have, for an example, one of the associate pastors I stayed at with Church Fimian had friends in Germany, and his wife and 2 daughters went there to live. the senior pastor here, his wife went to Poland and their 2 children for a while, but they've returned and just feel like they need to stay to help with the humanitarian effort.
You mentioned the twin brothers, and you said you might have a couple of other individual stories.
I do. Some, frankly, I'd almost like to forget, not the people, but the tragedies that took place. One was a family from Mariupol, which is in the far southeastern corner of Ukraine, very close to the Russian border, and it was invaded and occupied by Russian troops early in the war and had been bombed. Very few structures still stand totally intact. But there was a family that I spent a lot of time with. There was a mother, a father, 2 sons, and a nephew, as well as the father's father. All went below ground into the basement of their home because of the occupation and fear of what would happen to them. And they were there for multiple days. The 3rd day they were there, the grandfather, the father of the father, died of natural causes. Well, they waited a few days hoping maybe the troops would move on and they could get out, but they couldn't. They could still see out an opening in the basement that the troops were around. They even had some troops come into their house upstairs, but fortunately didn't check the basement for them. Well, they realized they had to do something with the body. So in the dark of the night, one night, they drug his father out, the 2 boys and the father just prepared a very shallow grave covered with some dirt and then threw some debris that was close by on top of him. They went back in, and a few days later they heard of an open window between 9 and noon the next day that they would be allowed to leave. So they gathered what they could. They did have a car, gathered what they could, got in the car, and there were nearly 200 lined up, and they were able to leave. 3 days later, they arrived in Lutz and staying at one of the refugee centers, and they said they got a call from another neighbor that said the person that lived right beside them, along with about 20 other cars, were running late for that 12 o'clock window. And so they lined up, and at 12:30, their next-door neighbor in his car started to take off as well. The others followed, and a tank shot, killed everybody in that car as well as everybody in the car behind them. So it's just one of those things where, you know, she shared that story with tears running down her face. You know, they had to leave a body almost exposed of his father. They had to leave everything they knew and owned to go west, not knowing what the future holds. So it's that type of tragedy that these people are living with. It's not just the food, clothing, and shelter, but it's the mental anguish that goes with it that's so difficult. Another story of Natasha, she's a dentist, she and her husband and son. I heard from them. They were living in the basement of their apartment building and finally were able to leave during one of these open areas and times. They had a small cottage out in the country, but when they were leaving town, they saw that it was occupied by Russian troops. So they had to just keep on going. They have no idea whether there'll be anything left, whether they'll go back, or even what the future holds. So take that to the number of hundreds of thousands of people and families, not just individuals, aged people, people with disabilities. They're just such a great need. And anybody that might feel so inclined to help, I would be glad to have any communication they might want to have to make that happen.
Dan, do you have any questions before we close?
No questions, really. I've put into this post your phone number and the email address. So if you want to reach Joel to have him make a presentation to your group, or if you want to help, maybe go back over and make some physical hand-to-hand help.
Sure.
I'm sure you can somehow tell them how that can happen.
Okay. I actually had at our presentation the other night a young person say, do you know if there's any volunteer opportunities there? And I said, I promise I'll make contact.
Very good. Again, before we close, contact information. Of course, Dan, how does the QR code work for people that want to use that?
If you're watching this on your TV or on your computer, just take your smartphone right up to that QR code. It'll scan it, and that'll take you right to their website for Phimium. And also, the information scrolling across the top on how to get a hold of both Joel and Phimium.
I might add, if I could, if you scan that QR code, it goes directly to their donation page.
Right.
If you just go to their website, it's all in Ukrainian. The donation page does have a portion in English, so that will help you out. And there will be multiple ways through PayPal or through credit card or debit card. But do make sure that you check U.S. dollars, not Ukrainian hryvnia, because if you do 100 Ukrainian or U.S. dollars, it'll be a very small amount of Ukrainian hryvnia.
It's that you were sharing a story before we went on the air about you had a translator with you most of the time, but there were circumstances where they were not with you.
Yeah.
And how did you communicate it? You told us that story.
We did. We have. I actually have a couple translation apps on my phone. A talk and speak, so I could speak into it and they could listen to it, or I could type things in and we could communicate that way. But as I mentioned, there's, I think God gives an ability to communicate in ways other than just with language at times. So it made an effective team when we were in Irpin.
And certainly the greatest way of communicating God's love is action, being the feet and hands of Jesus to our world. Joel, we appreciate what you're doing. Obviously, I haven't been there, but seeing these pictures impact us in such a way that do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and that really strikes the heart.
It does. It does indeed. And I think I am still debriefing, very honestly. It's been a difficult time for me as well. But recognizing what they've gone through and asking people to pray and to give, it's an active way that we can put the love of Christ in action.
Joel Gerber has been our guest today. Again, the information that's been available on our screen, if you'd like to have Joel come to speak to your church group, any civic organizations here in our community, he has expressed that he would be blessed to be able to share this story with as many people as possibly can. Our special edition on Leonard Media Live has been brought to you today by Hometown Motors Incorporated. Be sure to join Dan Ramey for our regular topics program at 11 o'clock this morning here on Leonard Media Live. For Dan Ramey, Joel Gerber, I'm Mike Smith.